Have you ever noticed how your entire life has become a waiting room? That somewhere along the way you started living in the space between now and next, in that shadowed corridor where everything real is always just about to happen. You're always almost there, almost ready, almost healed, almost worthy. What if I told you that this perpetual state of almost isn't an accident? That there's a reason you've been taught to live in the anteroom of your own existence? The pause before you truly begin has become your home, and you don't remember moving in. When was the last time you weren't waiting for something? For the perfect moment, the right feeling, the ideal circumstance? When did postponement become your primary relationship with living? The most common form of despair is not being who you are, Kierkegaard once whispered into the void. But perhaps the most insidious form is perpetually becoming who you might be, while never arriving. You see, there's an architecture to almost, a psychology to the waiting that has become the background radiation of your days. We need to look at why you've been conditioned to defer your life, to exist in the perpetual state of preparation. This isn't just about procrastination. This is about the elaborate system that has taught you that readiness is always on the horizon, never at your feet. Let's walk into this room together. The room where time keeps slipping, where soon never becomes now. It's darker here than you expected, but that's okay. Sometimes we need shadows to see clearly. You've been trained to wait since childhood. You'll understand when you're older. You can do that when you grow up. Not yet. Be patient. These weren't just practical postponements. They were the first classroom lessons in deferring your existence. You graduated from waiting for dessert to waiting for weekend, from waiting for summer break to waiting for graduation, from waiting to be hired to waiting for promotion, from waiting to meet someone to waiting for commitment. Always the next milestone, always the next threshold. How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives, Annie Dillard wrote. And how have you spent yours? Waiting, preparing, almost arriving. The average person will spend 6 months of their life waiting in line, 2 years trying to call people who aren't answering, 1 year looking for misplaced objects. But these are just the visible waitings, the countable ones. What about the years spent waiting to feel confident enough? The decades postponing joy until achievements are unlocked? The lifetime holding your breath before finally becoming who you already are? There is no statistical measure for that variety of waiting. That existential queue is too vast to calculate. When did you first learn that the present moment was merely a waiting room for the real thing? When did almost there become more comfortable than here? Was it when you were told that happiness comes after accomplishment, that worthiness follows achievement, that peace arrives after struggle? Or was it earlier, when you first sensed that who you naturally were wasn't enough, that you needed improvement before acceptance? The waiting began when you first believed that you needed fixing, when you accepted that incompleteness was your natural state. Between stimulus and response there is a space, Viktor Frankl noted. In that space is our power to choose our response. But what happens when that space expands infinitely? When the gap between stimulus and response becomes a lifetime? When waiting itself becomes the response? You've turned that sacred pause into a permanent address. The psychology of almost has a darker name: anticipatory existence, living not in the moment but in anticipation of moments, being defined not by what is, but by what might be. This is the shadow side of hope, when expectation eclipses experience, when preparation consumes the event itself. Have you noticed how your preparation for life has become your life? How readying yourself for joy has replaced joy itself? The planning of the vacation brings more pleasure than the trip. The anticipation of the meal exceeds the taste. The dream of success feels more vivid than achievement. This isn't coincidence, it's conditioning. You've been taught that satisfaction exists in anticipation because satisfied people are harder to sell to. Content people buy less. Present people aren't as easily manipulated. The psychology of almost is profitable. Your perpetual state of becoming is marketable. Your waiting is worth billions. Every advertisement whispers, "You're almost there, this will complete you." Every influencer implies, "Your real life begins after this transformation." Every guru suggests, "Enlightenment is just beyond this teaching." Always almost never arrived. But let me ask you something that might hurt. What if you're using almost ready as a shield against living? What if I'm preparing is actually I'm hiding? What terrifies you about being fully present, fully started, fully committed? What makes almost feel safer than entirely? Psychologists call it the end of history illusion. Our persistent belief that who we are right now is the finished version, while failing to recognize how much we've changed already. You look back at who you were 10 years ago and laugh at how little you knew, how differently you thought. Yet somehow you believe that today, finally, you've arrived at completion. This creates a paradox in your waiting. You're simultaneously working toward a finished self that you already believe exists, while also postponing life until reaching a future self that never materializes. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards, Kierkegaard observed. The tragedy is living neither backwards nor forwards, but sideways, in the perpetual almost. There's a pain to acknowledging this pattern. A specific ache comes with realizing how much life has been spent in the waiting room instead of the examination room, in preparation rather than participation. But beneath that pain is where possibility lives. Ask yourself, what am I really waiting for, and what would happen if I stopped waiting? What if readiness is a myth? What if there is no threshold of preparation after which life magically begins? We are always complaining that our days are few, Seneca wrote, and acting as if they were endless. This is the essence of almost living, treating time as both scarce and infinite. Never enough time to enjoy now, yet always enough time to postpone until later. The most dangerous form of waiting is the kind that masquerades as action, busy waiting, preparation that never ends, research that never concludes, learning that never applies. You can spend a lifetime in motion without ever actually moving forward. The truth is harder than the waiting. You're already as ready as you'll ever need to be for most of what matters. Between the idea and the reality falls the shadow, T.S. Eliot wrote. This shadow is where you've been living, between conception and creation, between emotion and response, between potential and kinetic. The psychology of almost has taught you to mistake shadow for substance. You collect templates instead of creating. You gather inspirations instead of inspiring. You bookmark wisdom instead of embodying it. You screenshot transformation instead of transforming. This isn't entirely your fault. The scaffolding of modern existence is built on the architecture of almost. Social media is the cathedral of almost, a place where everyone else seems to be arriving while you're still packing your bags. Where life is curated, highlight reels that make your blooper reel feel permanently behind schedule. The irony is piercing. You scroll through others' destinations while sitting in your own waiting room. Comparison is the thief of joy, Roosevelt observed. But it's also the architect of almost, building elaborate waiting rooms where you perpetually prepare for a life that others seem to be already living. What you don't see are their waiting rooms, their own almost states, their two small boxes of not yet and someday when. Everyone is waiting for something. Everyone lives partly in the shadow of almost. But some have learned to wait differently, to wait while also living, to prepare while also participating, to become while also being. This distinction matters more than any other. Are you waiting instead of living, or waiting while living? There's a particular agony to the almost life that comes from misunderstanding time itself. You've been taught that time is linear, that past flows into present, flows into future, that preparation naturally precedes action, that becoming leads to being. But what if time isn't a line but a field? What if now contains all moments simultaneously? The only time you ever have is now, Eckhart Tolle suggests, not as spiritual platitude, but as fundamental reality. When you're always preparing for the next moment, you're operating under a delusion that the future is somehow more real than the present, that then holds more possibility than now. This delusion keeps you waiting, keeps you almost. But here's what's true. The quality of your future depends entirely on the quality of your now. How you inhabit this moment determines how you'll inhabit all moments. If you're half present now, you'll be half present then. If you're perpetually preparing now, you'll be perpetually preparing then. The waiting room is portable. You'll carry it with you unless you deliberately set it down. Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment, Buddha taught. Not because the present is all that exists, but because it's the only moment in which change is possible. The great tragedy of almost living is that it creates the very emptiness it claims to be solving for. The more you wait to live, the more life itself becomes a thing that happens elsewhere, to other people. The almost life is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Let's be honest about something painful. Waiting can become an identity. I'm getting ready to start becomes not just what you do, but who you are. The perpetual student, the eternal planner, the professional preparer. There's safety in almost, protection in preparation. If you're always becoming, you never have to face the vulnerability of being. If you're perpetually on your way, you never have to endure the exposure of arrival. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, Marianne Williamson wrote. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. The psychology of almost is, at its core, a fear response. Not just fear of failure, but fear of success, fear of wholeness, fear of living without the comfortable constraints of not yet. What would you lose if you stopped waiting? What identity would dissolve? What excuses would evaporate? These are not comfortable questions. They're not meant to be. Comfort is what the waiting room provides. Discomfort is what the living room requires. The almost life feels safe because it places the burden of existence always slightly ahead of you, never quite on your shoulders in this exact moment. But safety and aliveness rarely coexist perfectly. When did you first learn that safety was more important than presence? When did waiting become more appealing than arriving? Was it when you first experienced disappointment? When reality failed to match your expectations? When vulnerability led to wound? Experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted, Randy Pausch observed. But the almost life prevents even that consolation. Without fully engaging, you can't even claim the wisdom of disappointment. You end up with neither the thing you wanted, nor the growth that comes from missing it. There's a specific flavor of regret that comes from realizing how much life has been spent in the waiting room. A peculiar grief for time lost not to tragedy or misfortune, but to preparation that never culminated. Bronnie Ware, who worked with the dying, found that one of the most common regrets was, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected. But there's a silent addendum to that regret. I wish I hadn't waited so long to begin. The most insidious aspect of the psychology of almost is how it disguises postponement as responsibility, how it frames waiting as wisdom. I'm being careful, you tell yourself. I'm being thorough, I'm being strategic. And sometimes you are, but often you're simply being afraid. Fear wears the costume of preparation. Terror masquerades as thoroughness. Everything you want is on the other side of fear, Jack Canfield suggests. But what's less discussed is that fear itself is often on the other side of waiting. The longer you wait, the larger fear grows. The more you postpone, the more monstrous the imagined obstacles become. Action isn't just the antidote to waiting. It's the antidote to the fear that causes waiting. When was the last time you did something before you felt completely ready? When did you last step into a room knowing you might not belong, or voice an idea knowing it might not be received? Those moments of premature action, of incomplete readiness, are often the only ones that change anything. The psychology of almost contains a central paradox. You're waiting until you no longer need to wait. You're preparing until preparation becomes unnecessary. You're becoming until becoming is complete. But what if completion itself is the illusion? Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced, Kierkegaard wrote. There is no solving for life, no final preparation after which you're permanently ready. Readiness isn't a destination, it's a decision. You don't arrive at ready, you declare it. You don't reach completion, you determine it. This is not motivational fluff. This is the mechanical reality of how lives actually progress, not through perfect preparation, but through imperfect beginnings. All meaningful journeys start before complete readiness. All significant growth occurs during, not before. The myth of readiness keeps you permanently almost. The illusion of the perfect starting line ensures you never truly begin. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, Lao Tzu observed, but the psychology of almost keeps you perpetually tying your shoes. What are you currently waiting for? What milestone have you decided must precede your full participation in living? Is it financial? When I have X dollars, then I'll... Is it professional? Once I reach this position, then I'll... Is it relational? After I find partnership, then I'll... Is it physical? When my body changes, then I'll... These are not invalid preparations, but they are often unnecessary prerequisites. The danger isn't in preparing, it's in believing that preparation must be complete before participation can begin. There's a Japanese concept called ma, the pause that gives shape to the whole, the empty space that defines what surrounds it. Waiting in its healthiest form can be a kind of ma, a purposeful pause that enhances what comes before and after. But the psychology of almost isn't healthy waiting. It's waiting that has lost its relationship to action, preparation divorced from purpose. It's the difference between the musician's deliberate rest between notes and the silence of an instrument never played, between the painter's thoughtful pause before the stroke and the blank canvas permanently propped on the easel. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, Voltaire cautioned. But the almost life does exactly that. It sacrifices all possible goods on the altar of a perfect that never materializes. The tragedy isn't that you're not perfect. The tragedy is that you're waiting to live until you are. What would change if you embraced the reality that no moment of readiness lies ahead, that the starting line is always where you stand right now? This isn't about abandoning preparation or jumping recklessly into the unprepared deep. It's about recognizing that preparation and participation aren't sequential, they're simultaneous. You don't prepare and then participate. You prepare by participating. You don't become ready and then begin. You become ready by beginning. The most effective preparation for living is living itself. We need to talk about the grief that comes with releasing the almost life, the specific sorrow of acknowledging time spent in waiting rooms that led nowhere. This grief is both necessary and valuable. What we don't grieve, we carry, therapists often observe. The unacknowledged losses of time, opportunity and presence accumulate into a burden that makes forward movement even harder. So allow yourself this grief. Feel the weight of the almost moments, the nearly experiences, the not quite connections. Then let them go. Not because they don't matter, but because holding them prevents you from grasping what's actually here. You must give up the life you planned in order to have the life that is waiting for you, Joseph Campbell wrote. The almost life is the one you've planned. The actual life is the one waiting for your full attention. The shift from almost to actually isn't comfortable. It isn't neat. It doesn't arrive with trumpets and clarity. It comes in quiet moments of decision, in small choices to be here instead of almost here, in tiny surrenders of the perfect future for the imperfect present. What would you do today if you believed that readiness is a myth? How would you move if you accepted that preparation never truly ends? Where have you been standing at the edge, telling yourself just a little more preparation when what you really mean is, I'm afraid to jump? There's a particular alchemy that happens when you choose presence over preparation, when you step out of the almost life and into the actual life. Suddenly, resources appear that weren't visible from the waiting room. Connections form that couldn't exist in isolation. Growth occurs that no amount of preparation could stimulate. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, W.H. Murray wrote. The moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. The psychology of almost keeps you from experiencing this alchemy. It convinces you that all elements must be gathered before the experiment can begin. But the most vital elements only reveal themselves through the heat of beginning. Think of the times in your life when you've actually moved from almost to action, when you've stepped out of preparation and into participation. Wasn't there a kind of magic in that movement, a shifting of reality itself to accommodate your decision to fully arrive? This isn't mysticism. It's the practical reality of attention and engagement. What you fully attend to transforms. What you wholly engage with responds. The waiting room offers no such alchemy. It provides only the illusion of progress, the sense of movement without the substance of arrival. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now, goes the Chinese proverb. The psychology of almost keeps you perpetually 20 years behind your own life. There's a reason why almost feels safer than entirely, why becoming feels more comfortable than being. Incompletion protects you from judgment, almost shields you from evaluation. Preparation buffers you from the verdicts that come with finished work and fully lived moments. It's not done yet, you can say. I'm still working on it. And in that not yet finished state, criticism can't fully land. Rejection can't completely take hold. Failure can't entirely count. The psychology of almost is, in many ways, a sophisticated defense mechanism against the vulnerability of completion. What would happen if you submitted the work before it was perfect? If you shared the idea while it was still forming? If you showed up before you felt entirely ready? These are not hypothetical questions. They're the exact crossroads where almost living and actual living diverge. Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome, Brené Brown observed. The almost life is an elaborate system for avoiding that precise vulnerability. But what are you protecting through this avoidance? And what are you losing? The cost of safety is experience. The price of preparation is presence. The toll of almost is actually. So where do we go from here? How do you dismantle a lifetime of almost and build a practice of actually? It begins with a single uncomfortable truth. You will never feel completely ready for the things that matter most. Not for love, not for creation, not for purpose, not for joy. The significant transitions never arrive with perfect preparation. They land with partial readiness and trembling hands. Do the thing you fear and the death of fear is certain, Ralph Waldo Emerson suggested. Replace fear with postpone and the wisdom still holds. Do the thing you postpone and the death of postponement begins. Start with something small, something you've been almost doing, nearly beginning, practically finishing. Don't make it monumental, don't frame it as life-changing. Just make it actual instead of almost. Send the imperfect message. Share the unpolished work. Express the incomplete thought. Take the insufficient action. Then notice what happens. Not just externally, but internally. Notice how presence feels different than preparation. How being registers differently in your body than becoming. The scariest moment is always just before you start, Stephen King observed, which means that starting instantly makes things less scary than preparing to start. Action is the antidote to anticipation. Participation is the cure for preparation sickness. There's a radical permission waiting on the other side of almost, a particular freedom that comes from abandoning the myth of complete readiness. When you stop waiting for perfect circumstances, every circumstance becomes workable. When you cease requiring ideal conditions, any condition can serve your growth. Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you, Jean-Paul Sartre proposed. The psychology of almost keeps you focused on what's been done to you, all the reasons you cannot fully begin. Actual living asks, what will you do despite what's been done to you? How will you participate regardless of preparation? This isn't blind optimism. It's clear-eyed engagement with reality as it exists, not as you wish it would become. The almost life keeps you perpetually oriented toward an imagined future where conditions finally align. The actual life grounds you in the present where conditions already exist, imperfect but immediate. One awaits perfection, the other creates within imperfection. One postpones until readiness, the other redefines readiness as willingness. When did you first learn that willingness was insufficient? That desire alone couldn't qualify you to begin. That enthusiasm was inadequate without extensive credentials. These are not natural limitations. They're learned hesitations, acquired delays. You were born fully present. You arrived already participating. Your first breaths weren't preceded by preparation. They were drawn in the messy midst of becoming. That capacity for unprepared presence still lives in you. That ability to begin before readiness still burns beneath accumulated layers of almost. What you seek is seeking you, Rumi wrote, but it can only find you when you stop moving the target. when you cease repositioning the threshold of your own enoughness. The psychology of almost keeps you in constant motion, always advancing the requirements for your own beginning, always increasing the prerequisites for your own participation. After I learn this one more thing, once I fix this one last issue, when I acquire this final piece, but readiness is not a destination, it's a decision. You don't arrive at ready, you declare it. You don't reach prepare enough, you determine it. So here's my question to you. What would change if you decided right now that you are as ready as you need to be? Not perfectly prepared, not ideally equipped, just sufficiently ready to begin what matters. What door would that open? What movement would that allow? What life would that make possible? The answer won't come from more preparation. It will only emerge through participation. Not almost living, actually living. Not nearly present, entirely here. Not someday when, today now. If something in this room resonated in your bones, leave it here for others to find. Tell me which line found the part of you that's been waiting too long. Sometimes naming the waiting is the first step toward ending it. And perhaps in that ending, your actual life can finally begin.